The fluorescent lights of the Oak Ridge Elementary School auditorium buzzed like sleepy insects, casting a pale, unflattering glow over everything. The air was warm and thick with the smell of floor wax, old curtains, and the faint, clean scent of children's shampoo. On the stage, a velvet curtain of faded maroon hung, a little dusty at the hem. This was the night of the Winter Talent Show, an event that marched on year after year with a certain cheerful, predictable chaos. In the third row, sitting stiffly in a fold-out chair, was a little boy named Leo. He was small for his age, with hair that insisted on falling into his eyes, no matter how many times he pushed it back. His good clothes a collared shirt that felt stiff at the neck and dark trousers itched. He focused on a loose thread on his knee, winding it around his finger, trying to be anywhere but here. All around him was a rustling, whispering ocean of parents and siblings. Mothers adjusted video cameras on their phones. Fathers checked the time. Younger brothers squirmed and were hushed. The show itself was a parade of brave, ordinary childhood efforts. There was a magic act where the brightly colored scarf stubbornly refused to disappear. A group of girls in tutus performed a dance that was mostly enthusiastic jumping. Two best friends told knock-knock jokes, dissolving into helpless giggles before the punchline, which made the audience laugh even more. The applause after each act was kind and loud, a warm blanket of support thrown over the performers. Leo clapped when everyone else did, his small hands making a soft, polite sound. He didn't mind the show. In a way, he liked its predictable noise. It gave him a place to hide. His eyes, however, kept drifting away from the stage, over to the side of the auditorium. There, in the shadowy wing, stood the reason for the tight knot in his stomach. The grand piano. It was a beautiful old thing, its dark wood gleaming under a single, lonely work light. To Leo, it wasn't just an instrument. It was a giant, sleeping creature. He knew its face better than anyone. He knew where the scratch was near the middle C, a small, white line like a scar. He knew that the F-sharp key, near the top, had a tiny chip on its edge. He knew its sound, even when it wasn't being played, a kind of silent hum that only he seemed to hear. Miss Albright, the music teacher, was the conductor of this yearly circus. She stood in the wings opposite the piano, her clipboard in hand, a patient smile fixed on her face. She was a woman who believed deeply that every child had a song inside them, waiting to be found. Her eyes, warm and observant, scanned the rows of her students. They passed over Leo, as they often did. He was so quiet, so good at folding himself into the background. But Miss Albright had heard things. In her classroom, there was an old upright piano against the wall, its yellowed keys telling stories of decades of children's songs. Sometimes after school, when she was grading papers at her desk, she would hear music. It wasn't the plunking of random notes or the slow, struggling scales of a beginner. It was something else. A few bars of something complicated and sad, flowing like water, then stopping abruptly, as if a door had been softly closed. She would look up and see Leo, his back to her, his small figure curved over the keyboard. He never played when asked. He never played for the class. He only played when he thought the world had forgotten him. The show was running ahead of schedule. The juggler had dropped all his balls, taken a bow to uproarious applause, and scampered off. Miss Albright checked her watch and then her list. There was a gap, 5 minutes to fill. A nervous energy started to creep into an audience when there was silence. Parents would begin to chat. Children would get restless. She needed an act, just a small one, to bridge the time. Her gaze traveled over the children in the front rows, the usual eager volunteers who were already waving their hands slightly, hoping to be called. But then her eyes stopped on Leo. He was looking at the piano on stage, his expression unreadable. In that moment, she didn't see just a shy boy. She saw the boy who whispered secrets to the old piano in her room. A thought, impulsive and bright, flashed in her mind. What if the song inside him wasn't meant to be a secret? She felt a flutter of nervousness herself. Was it fair to call on him? He had never volunteered. He might refuse. He might freeze. But the memory of that haunting, unfinished melody from the classroom corner pushed her forward. Sometimes, she believed, a child needed an invitation more than a choice. She walked to the center of the stage, her shoes making a soft tap on the wooden floor. The murmurs died down. She smiled at the audience, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "We have a little time for one more special performance," she said, her voice calm and clear through the microphone. She turned her body slightly towards the seats where the fourth graders sat. "Leo," she said, and her voice was gentle. An invitation, not a command. "Would you come up and share a song with us?" A total, profound silence fell for a single beat. Then, a wave of whispers swept through the audience. Who was Leo? Parents craned their necks. Children looked around, searching. In the third row, Leo felt the world drop out from under him. His stomach clenched. The itchy thread on his trousers suddenly seemed like the most important thing in the universe. All the air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. He could hear his own heart, a frantic drumbeat in his ears. He looked up and saw every face, it seemed, turned towards him. He saw Miss Albright's encouraging smile. He saw the giant silent piano waiting under the light. A part of him wanted to shrink, to disappear into the chair. But another part, a small, stubborn part that lived in his fingertips when they touched the keys, stirred Dot slowly, as if moving through deep water. He unwound the thread from his finger. He stood up. The folding chair made a small, scraping sound that echoed in the quiet. He began the long, long walk. The aisle seemed to stretch for miles. The sound of his own footsteps on the linoleum was terribly loud. He didn't look at anyone. He kept his eyes on the stage, on the piano's shiny black side Dot. As he climbed the 3 wooden steps at the side, the stage lights felt hot and blinding. The audience was a dark, shapeless sea beyond them. He walked to the piano. It looked even bigger up close, a mountain of polished wood and wire. He pulled out the heavy stool, its legs scraping on the floor. He climbed onto it. His feet, in their polished Sunday shoes, did not touch the ground. They dangled, small and helpless looking. He sat there for a moment, a tiny figure dwarfed by the magnificent instrument. The auditorium was utterly still. You could hear a single cough from somewhere in the back, someone shifting in their seat. The anticipation was a living thing in the air. They expected, perhaps, a simple, stumbling tune, a child's song. Maybe he would play a few notes and run off, and they would give him kind applause. Leo looked at the keys. They were a landscape of white and black, familiar and strange all at once. He wasn't in the auditorium anymore. The hot lights faded. The quiet crowd disappeared. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere safe and sad and private. He lifted his hands, small and slender. He took a deep, slow breath that nobody heard. And then he placed his fingers on the keys, closed his eyes, and began to play. The first sound was not a note, but a breath. A deep, resonant chord rose from the piano, so full and rich it seemed to vibrate in the very wood of the floor. It wasn't the timid, tinkling sound everyone expected. This was a sound with weight, with shadows in it. Leo's small hands, which had seemed so lost a moment before, now moved with a sure, quiet purpose across the keyboard. The melody that unfolded was not a song anyone in the room knew. It wasn't chopsticks. It wasn't a peppy show tune or a simplified pop song. It was something ancient and new all at once. It was slow, like a careful walk through a dark forest. The notes were complex, weaving together in patterns that felt sad and beautiful and deeply serious. One hand played a low, steady heartbeat of a rhythm, while the other traced a singing, sorrowful line above a dot in the front row. A little girl who had been braiding the ends of her hair let her hands fall still into her lap. Her head tilted. She didn't understand the music, but she felt it. It made her think of the day her goldfish had floated at the top of the bowl, a quiet, confusing sadness. Parents glanced at each other, their expressions shifting from polite expectation to genuine surprise. This wasn't a child performing. This was something else. A man in the middle, who had been secretly checking a sports score on his phone under his jacket, slowly put the phone away. The glowing screen felt rude now, an intrusion. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and just listened. Miss Albright, standing in the shadows of the wing, felt her clipboard hang forgotten at her side. Her professional smile was gone, replaced by something raw and awestruck. She had heard glimpses, pieces of this in her empty classroom. But those were fragments, secrets mumbled to the walls. This, under the lights, was the whole story. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't asked a student to perform a party trick. She had, without knowing, opened a door to a child's soul, and what was coming out was a masterpiece. A cold thrill, part wonder and part fear that she had made a terrible mistake, shot through her. The music didn't get faster or louder. It deepened. It grew more intricate. Leo's body was perfectly still, except for his hands and his arms. His eyes remained closed. He was not here with them. He was somewhere inside the music. A small, subtle shift in the melody introduced a thread of longing, a series of climbing notes that seemed to ask a question over and over. Reaching for something just out of sight. In the back row, a woman sat perfectly straight. It was Leo's mother. One hand was pressed tightly over her mouth, as if to hold in a sound. The other hand gripped the empty seat next to her knuckles white. Her eyes were wide, glistening with tears that did not fall. She knew this music. She knew the very shape of it. 2 years ago, in a sunlit room in their old house, this melody had lived in the air every evening. It had been a rough, searching thing then, played by larger, stronger hands that would often stop, sigh, and start again. Her husband would call it his gray sky music. He was trying to capture a feeling, he said, not just write a tune. He never finished it. And now, here it was. Not a copy, but the very heart of it. The sadness, the searching, the unanswered question. Her little boy, who had hardly spoken of his father in a year, was speaking to him now. In front of everyone. The pride and the pain of it split her right down the middle. She wanted to run to the stage and hug him. She wanted to hide him away from all these staring eyes. She just sat, frozen, listening to her husband's last song breathe again through her son. On stage, Leo traveled deeper into the landscape of the music. A section came that was all gentle, rolling waves of sound, like remembering something happy from a very long time ago. A faint, almost invisible softening touched his concentrated face. But it didn't last. The music turned again, not angry, but heavy. The low notes rumbled like distant thunder. It felt like carrying a weight that was too big for you. A father in the audience, a mechanic with grease he could never quite get out from under his nails, felt a tightness in his own throat. He didn't know why. The music made him think of his own dad, gone 10 years, and the smell of his workshop. It wasn't a memory of words, just a feeling of loss he never talked about. He looked down at his hands, then back at the small boy on the stage with a new, rough respect that the silence in the room was now a different kind of silence. It wasn't the quiet of waiting. It was the quiet of being pulled into something. No one coughed. No one whispered. A baby, who had been fussing softly in its mother's arms, grew still and calm, its wide eyes fixed on the lights. The only sound was the piano. It filled every corner, not with noise, but with feeling. Leo's playing was flawless, but it wasn't the flawless of a machine. It was the flawless of true feeling. You could hear the slight pressure of his finger on a key to make it weep, the delicate lift of his hand to let a note fade into a whisper. He was telling a story without a single word. A story of an empty chair at the dinner table, of a silence in the house where there used to be laughter, of trying to hold on to the echo of a voice. Ms. Albright's fear melted away, leaving only a trembling awe. She saw now that the piano was not a monster to Leo. It was his friend. It was the one thing he could talk to. And he was speaking a language that every single person in the room, regardless of age, somehow understood. This was no longer a school talent show. It had become a shared moment, fragile and real as the piece moved towards what felt like its end. The music became simpler, cleaner. The complicated questions fell away, leaving a single, pure line of melody. It was heartbreakingly sweet. It was the sound of love, after all the sadness. It was a goodbye, and a way of keeping someone close. Leo played the final notes, a series of soft, clear chords that rang like distant bells, each one hanging in the air a little longer than the last. The very last note was so quiet, it was almost a thought. He held the pedal down, letting its vibration fade slowly, slowly into nothing. Then it was over. His small hands came to rest, palms down on his legs. He was breathing a little faster. He opened his eyes. He looked out at the dark sea of the audience, and for a second he seemed confused, as if he had just woken up from a deep dream and didn't know where he was. The hot stage lights, the smell of the dust, the giant, silent piano in front of him, it all came rushing back, and the audience did nothing. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They sat in the wake of the music, utterly still. The quiet was now complete, thicker than before. It was a held breath. It was respect. It was the feeling you get after someone tells you a secret that is too important to break with sound. In that long, profound silence, Leo sat on the stool, his feet dangling, waiting for the world to start again. The silence that filled the auditorium was a living thing. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air just before a storm breaks, but softer. No one moved. No one seemed to know how to break the spell that had been spun from piano wire and memory dot in the back row. Leo's mother finally let out the breath she had been holding. It came out as a soft, shaky sigh. The tears that had pooled in her eyes now escaped, tracing two quiet paths down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She was looking at her son, but she wasn't seeing the small boy in the stiff shirt. She was seeing a doorway open in time, 2 years. It had been 2 years since the world went quiet. Her husband, a man whose hands were always moving, either on the piano keys or fixing things around the house, was just gone. A sudden, cruel thing that left no time for long goodbyes, only a huge, echoing absence. The worst part, in a way, was the silence in their home. The grand piano in the living room, his proudest possession, became a giant piece of furniture, a monument to the noise that was missing. A sheet was draped over it, like a ghost. Leo had been so small then. Quiet to begin with, he retreated into a deeper silence. He didn't cry much. He just seemed to fold in on himself. He would stand in the doorway of the living room, looking at the covered piano. His mother would ask if he wanted to talk, to play, to do anything. He would just shake his head. She remembered the first time she heard the music again. It was a few months after. She was in the kitchen washing dishes, the water running loud, lost in her own thoughts. Then she heard it a few notes, hesitant, feeling their way. She turned the water off, her hands dripping. She crept to the hallway. The sheet was pulled halfway off the piano, and there was Leo, perched on the very edge of the stool his father had used, his small feet miles from the pedals. He was pressing a single key over and over, listening to the sound die away. She almost rushed in. She almost said, "Don't touch that." It felt too painful, too sacred. But something stopped her. She saw the intense focus on his face. He wasn't playing. He was listening. He was searching. She slipped away, her heart aching in a new way. It became a secret ritual. She would hear him sometimes in the late afternoons, after school. Never a song, just pieces. A cluster of notes here, a sad little melody there. He was like an archaeologist, brushing dust off fragments of a lost language. She realized, with a jolt, that he was trying to find his father's last piece, the one he called the unfinished. Her husband had played it constantly in those last weeks, chasing the right ending, grumbling that it was like trying to catch smoke. Leo must have heard it from his bedroom, night after night. He must have absorbed it, note by note, feeling by feeling, into his very bones. He was too young for formal lessons, but he had learned something deeper, the language of his father's heart. She never spoke to him about it. It felt like a pact. If she acknowledged it, the fragile magic might break. He might stop. So she let the music be their secret conversation. She would be cooking, and a phrase would float in from the living room, a questioning, rising series of notes. And she would understand the question. Asterisk, where did he go? She would listen, and her silence was her answer. I don't know. And now, here in this bright, ordinary school auditorium, he had taken all those private, broken pieces and put them together. He had finished the unfinished, not with a flourish, but with that aching, beautiful simplicity. He had stood in front of everyone and said, with his fingers, what he could never say with his mouth. Asterisk, I remember. I miss him. This is how asterisk on stage. Leo blinked. The silence was starting to feel loud. He looked out at the sea of dark shapes and shining eyes. His heart, which had been steady while he played, began to flutter like a trapped bird. What had he done? He had only meant to play the song in his head, the one that was always there. He hadn't meant to make everyone so quiet. A hot wave of embarrassment started to creep up his neck. He wanted to get down, to run back to his chair, to hide. His eyes darted to the wing where Miss Albright stood. She wasn't smiling her teacher smile. Her face was serious, but her eyes were bright. She gave him a small, slow nod. It wasn't a well-done nod. It was an I see you nod. It steadied him. Just a little dot in the audience. The spell began to gently dissolve. Not with a crash, but with a soft rustle. A woman near the front took a deep, shuddering breath, as if coming up for air. An older man, a grandfather perhaps, carefully took off his glasses and wiped them with his handkerchief, taking his time. Then, from the middle of the crowd, a single pair of hands came together. It was the mechanic, the one who had thought of his own father. The clap was slow and solid, like two pieces of wood meeting. It broke the stillness. It was as if that one sound gave everyone permission. Another pair of hands joined, then another. The applause didn't erupt. It grew. It swelled from the middle outwards, like a warm wave moving through the room. It wasn't the wild, cheering clapping for the dancers. This was different. It was slower, heavier, full of respect. People were getting to their feet. The fold-out chairs squeaked and clattered as one row, then another rose. Leo stared, bewildered. They were standing for him? He looked at all the faces, now visible as they stood. He saw wet eyes, kind smiles, looks of amazement. He didn't understand it. He had just played the song from the quiet house. His gaze finally found the back row. He found his mother. She was standing too, her hands clasped in front of her heart, tears still on her face. But she was smiling. A real, wide, beautiful smile that lit up her whole face. It was a smile he hadn't seen in a very long time. In that moment, he understood something wordless but important. He hadn't done something wrong by playing their secret song. He had done something right. The applause continued, a steady, warm sound that wrapped around him. He didn't know what to do. He remembered seeing performers bow. Slowly, awkwardly, he slid off the stool. His legs felt wobbly. He turned to face the audience fully and gave a quick, small bow from the waist. Just a dip of his head and shoulders. This made the applause grow even warmer. Someone let out a soft, "Wow!" A child's voice, clear and amazed, said, "How did he do that?" Ms. Albright saw him standing there, looking lost in the wave of sound. She walked onto the stage, her steps quiet. She didn't go to the microphone. She simply walked to him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She leaned down and said, close to his ear so only he could hear, "That was the most honest thing I have ever heard." Then she guided him, her hand a steady anchor on his back, toward the steps off the stage. The applause followed them, not stopping as he walked up the aisle now, not as a performer, but just as a boy again. People reached out as he passed, not to grab him, but to gently touch his arm, to pat his back. Soft words drifted to him. "Beautiful, son. That was incredible. Thank you." He didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the floor, his face flushed hot. But the knot in his stomach was gone. The frantic fluttering in his chest was softening. He felt his mother's presence before he saw her. She was waiting at the end of the row. As he reached her, she didn't scoop him into a huge hug in front of everyone. She just knelt down right there on the linoleum floor and opened her arms. He walked into them, burying his face in her shoulder. She held him tightly, her own face pressed into his hair. "You found it," she whispered, her voice thick. "You finished his song." He didn't answer. He just held on. Around them, the applause finally began to fade, turning into a hum of murmured conversation, a collective releasing of breath. But in their small space at the back of the auditorium, there was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the quiet of absence anymore. It was the quiet of a puzzle piece, long lost, finally clicking back into place. The rest of the talent show was a blur. It was like waking up from a deep, vivid dream and trying to pay attention to ordinary things. The final acts went on a group singing a popular song, a boy demonstrating karate moves, but the air in the room had changed. The clapping after each performance was polite, but people's eyes kept drifting towards the back row, where a small boy sat with his mother, looking at his hands in his lap. Leo felt like he was made of glass. The loud sounds of the singing, the sharp shouts from the karate demonstration, felt too bright and too sharp. He was aware of people looking at him, not staring, just glancing. Whispers seemed to curl through the air around him, and even though he couldn't hear the words, he knew they were about him. He wanted to shrink, to become invisible again. The feeling of being on the stage, of all those eyes on him, came rushing back in a hot, uncomfortable wave. His mother kept her arm around his shoulders, solid and warm. She didn't say much. She just gave his shoulder a little squeeze every now and then. She knew he was feeling too much all at once. When the karate boy took a final bow and the principal walked on stage to thank everyone, Leo felt a rush of relief. It was over. But as the lights came up fully and the buzz of conversation rose like a swarm of bees, he realized the next part might be harder. People began to stand, gathering coats and bags, and they started to move, many of them. Moving toward him first was Miss Albright. She weaved through the crowd, her clipboard now tucked under her arm. She crouched down in front of his chair, so she was at his eye level. Her face was kind and serious. "Leo," she said, her voice soft, "I need you to know something. I asked you to play because I'd heard you touch the piano in class. I thought you had a little song to share. I didn't know. I didn't know you had a whole world inside there. Thank you for trusting us with it." Leo looked at her shoes, then up at her face. He gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. He didn't know what to say. "You're welcome" didn't feel right. "That music," Miss Albright continued, choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't from a book, was it?" He shook his head no. She nodded, as if that confirmed something very important. "It came from you. And that's the very best kind. Don't ever stop listening to it." She patted his knee once, gently, and stood up. She shared a look with his mother, a look full of unspoken understanding, and then she moved away to speak to other parents. Then other people came. A father with a kind, tired face shook Leo's small hand with his big, rough one. "That was something special, young man," he said, his voice gravelly. "You made me think of my brother." "Thank you." He moved on quickly, as if embarrassed by his own words. A grandmother with soft eyes leaned down. "You have a gift, sweetheart. A real gift." She touched his cheek lightly with her wrinkled hand. Her touch was cool and gentle. Children came too, fellow students. They didn't say much. They just looked at him with wide, curious eyes. One boy, who was known for being the fastest runner in 4th grade, gave him a thumbs up and a shy grin. A girl who was always organizing games at recess simply said, "That was really pretty, Leo." Before darting back to her own mother. Leo handled it all with a quiet, stunned politeness. He nodded. He mumbled thank you when prompted by his mother. But inside, he was floating somewhere outside of his own body. The words felt like they were meant for someone else, for the boy who had played that music. Not for him, the boy who was just Leo. His mother was his shield. She smiled. She thanked people for their kindness. She kept a firm, gentle hand on him. "He's a little overwhelmed," she would say softly, and people would nod and smile and back away. Finally, the crowd thinned. The auditorium was almost empty. Just a few parents stacking chairs at the front. The janitor was at the side, sweeping up a discarded program. The reality of the quiet, empty space was a relief. "Ready to go home?" His mother asked, her voice normal again, like it was any other day. He nodded vigorously. They walked out into the crisp winter night. The air was cold and sharp, a shock after the warm, stuffy auditorium. It felt clean. Leo took a deep breath, watching his breath make a cloud in the air. The parking lot was almost empty. Their car, an old sedan, was waiting under a flickering STRE, ETLIGHT. They got in. His mother started the engine, and the heater began to blow cold air that would slowly turn warm. She didn't pull out of the space right away. They just sat in the quiet dark, the only sound the rumble of the engine. She looked over at him, his profile lit by the dashboard lights. "You okay?" she asked. He thought about it. Was he okay? His heart wasn't pounding anymore. The itchy clothes just felt normal now. The feeling of being made of glass was fading. He felt tired. A deep, good tired, like after a long day outside. "Yeah," he said, his own voice sounding small in the car. "Do you want to talk about it?" She asked, not pushing, just offering. He was quiet for a long time, looking out at the empty playground next to the school, the swings hanging still in the dark. I heard it in my head, and my hands knew what to do." "They did," she said softly. "They knew exactly what to do." Another silence. Then, the question he had carried for 2 years, the one the music asked over and over, finally found words in the safe dark of the car. Do you think he heard it?" His mother's breath caught. She looked straight ahead through the windshield, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She thought of the last, pure notes of the song, the ones that sounded like love. She thought of the feeling in the silent auditorium, a feeling that was too big to be contained by just a room. She reached over and took his hand. It was cold. She wrapped both of her warm hands around it. "Leo," she said, her voice firm and sure. "I think that was the loudest he's ever heard anything." He turned his head to look at her then. In the dim light, he saw her smile, a real, true smile. The weight he had been carrying, a weight he didn't even know had a name, didn't vanish. But it changed. It became something he could hold. Instead of something that was holding him. She let go of his hand and finally put the car in reverse. "Let's go home." As they drove through the quiet streets, past houses with glowing windows, Leo leaned his head against the cool glass of the window. The song was still in his head, but it was quiet now, settled. It wasn't a question anymore. It was just a memory and a tune. When they got home, the house was dark and silent as always. They took off their coats and shoes. His mother went to turn on the kitchen light, but Leo stopped in the doorway of the living room. The grand piano stood in the corner, still half covered by its dusty sheet, a silent shape in the moonlight coming through the window. He walked over to it. He didn't pull the sheet off. He just put his hand on the wood, right where he knew the smooth spot was. It felt cool and solid. For the first time in 2 years, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. It felt like the quiet after his song had ended, full of something that didn't need sound to be real. He knew then that he could play it again tomorrow. Not for an audience. Not to finish anything. Just to say hello. And that was enough. The next morning, the world tried to go back to normal. The sun came up, pale and wintry. The clock by Leo's bed showed it was time for school. His ordinary clothes, soft from many washes, felt familiar and easy against his skin. The house was quiet, but the quiet felt different now. It wasn't a waiting quiet. It was just quiet. At breakfast, his mother moved around the kitchen as she always did. The radio played softly in the background, a man talking about the weather. She put a bowl of cereal in front of him and ruffled his hair. "Big day yesterday," she said, her voice light. "You sure you want to go to school? You could stay home. Take it easy." He thought about it. He thought about the hallways, the other kids looking at him, the whispers. A little knot of worry tightened in his stomach. But he also thought about the piano in the music room, its familiar scratch near the middle C. He thought about his own desk, the one with the wobbly leg. "I want to go," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. The walk to school was the same as always. The same cracks in the sidewalk, the same big tree with the bare branches. But when he pushed open the heavy front door of Oak Ridge Elementary, everything felt louder. The sounds of lockers slamming, kids shouting, shoes squeaking on polished floors, it all rushed at him like a wave, and people noticed him. Not in a mean way, but heads turned. A group of fifth graders he didn't know stopped talking as he walked past, then started whispering. A girl from his class saw him. Her eyes went wide, and she quickly looked down at her shoes. He kept his head down, making himself small, and hurried to his classroom. The first few minutes were the hardest. He slid into his seat, focusing on pulling his notebooks out of his bag. He could feel eyes on the back of his neck. Then, the boy who sat next to him, a kid who usually talked non-stop about video games, leaned over. "Hey," the boy said, his voice hushed. That was really cool yesterday. The piano thing." Leo just nodded, not looking up. "My mom cried," the boy said, as if reporting a fascinating fact. "I didn't get it, but it was cool." Then the teacher walked in, and the day began. Math, spelling, social studies. The ordinary rhythm of school slowly wrapped around him like a blanket. By mid-morning, the strange feeling started to fade. He was just Leo again. The boy who was good at math, who liked to read during quiet time, who never put his hand up first. When the bell rang for music class after lunch, a fresh jitteriness came back. This was Miss Albright's class. This was the room with the piano. He walked in last. The old upright piano was there, against the wall, looking just the same. Miss Albright was at the front, arranging some papers. She smiled at the class, a normal, cheerful teacher smile. "All right, everyone. Find a spot on the rug, please. We're going to learn a new singing game today." It was a normal class. They sang a funny song about a bear. They clapped rhythms. No one mentioned the talent show. No one looked at Leo any differently than before. Miss Albright didn't call on him. She didn't ask him to play. She just let him be part of the group. And that, more than anything, made the last of the tightness in his chest unwind. He was just another kid in music class. He sang the silly song softly. He clapped the rhythm. He was invisible again, and it felt safe. Near the end of the period, while the other children were busy with rhythm sticks, Miss Albright walked over to the bookshelf near where Leo was sitting. As she bent down to pick something up, she spoke quietly, her voice just for him. "The piano misses you," she said, not looking at him, pretending to examine a book. "But it can wait until you're ready." Then she stood up and walked back to the front of the class. "All right, everyone, sticks in the basket." The rest of the school day passed in a gentle, forgettable blur. When the final bell rang, Leo felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He had survived. The world hadn't changed. He had. He was walking down the front steps of the school, heading for the gate, when a voice called out behind him. "Hey, piano kid." He turned. It was the karate boy from the talent show. He was a grade older, with a confident walk. He caught up to Leo, falling into step beside him. "That was some secret weapon you had," the karate boy said, grinning. "I just break boards. You made, like everyone, freeze. Way more powerful." Leo didn't know what to say. "You gonna play in the spring show?" The boy asked. Leo shook his head quickly. "No." "Okay," the boy said, not pushing it. He shrugged. "Well, if you ever want to learn to break a board, let me know. Seems like you're good at concentrating." He gave a little mock karate chop in the air, then ran off to join his friends. Leo walked the rest of the way home alone, a small, faint smile on his face. Piano Kid. It was a new name, but it didn't feel bad. That evening, after his homework was done and the dishes were washed, the house settled into its nightly quiet. His mother was reading a book on the sofa. Leo stood in the doorway of the living room. Looking at the covered piano. He walked over, and for the first time without hesitation, he took hold of the old sheet. He pulled it off in one smooth motion. A cloud of dust danced in the lamplight. The piano stood revealed, dark and grand and beautiful. He didn't play the song from the auditorium. That felt like it belonged to last night. Instead, he climbed onto the stool, settled his hands on the keys, and let his fingers wander. He played a few notes from the Silly Bear song from music class. It sounded funny and wrong on the grand piano, and it made him smile. He messed around, making up a little tune that was happy and light, a tune about a normal day. His mother looked up from her book. She listened for a moment, then went back to reading, a peaceful expression on her face. This was a new sound. It was his own. A few days later, a small envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to Leo. Inside was a card from Miss Albright. It wasn't fancy. On the front was a picture of a single musical note. Inside, in her careful handwriting, it said, "Asterisk, dear Leo. Asterisk, asterisk, A true artist doesn't play for the crowd. He plays for the silence that comes after. You taught all of us how to listen to it. Thank you. Your friend, Miss Albright, P.S. The piano in room 107 is always there for you. If you ever want to visit. He kept the card on his dresser, next to a small rock he liked and a drawing he'd made a long time ago. Winter turned slowly toward spring. Leo still sat in the back. He still raised his hand only when he was sure. But something inside him had settled. The music inside him wasn't a secret he had to hide anymore. It was just a part of him, like the color of his eyes. Sometimes, after school, he would go to the music room. Miss Albright would be there, grading papers. She would look up and smile, then go back to her work. He would sit at the old, scratched-up piano and play. Sometimes it was his father's song. Sometimes it was something new. Sometimes it was just scales dot he was playing for no one. He was playing for the empty chairs, for the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, for himself. And the quiet that followed his music was no longer something that scared him. It was a friend. It was the sound of something being said that didn't need words, hanging in the air, perfect and complete, before slowly fading away, ready to be found again another day.